Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, President Biden facing several challenges, including struggling poll numbers, inflation, and a stalled agenda. With the midterm elections months away, Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey breaks down the party's plans and how a Supreme Court vacancy could impact the midterms. Co-host of Fox and Friends and host of the Brian Kilmeade radio show, Brian Kilmeade joins the rundown. He chats about the launch of his new weekend show, One Nation, his Fox Nation series, What Made America Great, and his push to unite Americans instead of dividing them. Plus commentary by comedian Chris Freed. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You could subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Greg Gutfeld.
I'm Tammy Bruce.
I'm Steve Ducey, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, January 28th, 2022. I'm Lisa Brady. Rising crime is a growing concern for many Americans. Can a new police reform bill help?
The big lesson is you need to invest, not defund. You need to actually put resources forward to help our officers, our departments, and our communities to make them stronger.
I'm Dave Anthony. He's keeping his day job, but Brian Kilmeade is adding to his busy schedule with a primetime Saturday night TV show.
Well, I just think that there's a lot of things dividing our country. I want to see if I can find some things that don't.
And I'm Chris Freed. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
An outpouring of support from around the country has followed the ambush-style killing of two young police officers in New York City.
When is it going to stop? When did we become the bad guys? It just doesn't make any sense to me. We're out there risking our lives for the community.
Tommy Shevlin is president of the Police Benevolent Association in Nassau County, New York. He says they need support every day from the community and elected officials. But law enforcement has been a hotly debated topic in recent years after the mass protests and riots that followed the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, helping to fuel the defund police movement. And now we're in a midterm election year, which could make it more difficult to get anything done in Congress.
I'm optimistic. I think if you look at what we were able to come together around at the end of last year on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I worked quite a bit on.
Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer is in his third term serving New Jersey's 5th District. He also co-chairs the House Problem Solvers Caucus, 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans.
Our roads, bridges, rail, water infrastructure. We all sat together. I co-chair this group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans. We come together every week with one purpose of getting things done. And I think now with the piece of legislation focused on China, on chips manufacturing, more domestic manufacturing, especially we see out of COVID and how reliant we were on foreign manufacturing and how we need to do more of it here at home. That legislation is bipartisan as well. And then you've got legislation that we're talking about today, which the Invest Protect Act, which is also bipartisan. So I'm confident that if we actually sit together and work together, that whether you're dealing with affordability issues or our foreign affairs issues, there's plenty we can do across the aisle to get done.
So the Invest Protect Act is basically a police reform bill, correct? What's in it, and is it different or similar to other proposals in recent years?
There's been several efforts that I've been involved with on police reform over the last couple of years, working with Democrats and Republicans together with the Problem Solvers Caucus. And this takes parts of it out of some of our work and places where we've been able to find common ground. It's why Congressman Rutherford, who's a Republican from Florida, former sheriff, and I wrote the bill. We've got about 40 co-sponsors now, half Democrat, half Republican. It's backed by the FOP and the Fraternal Order of Police and the Sheriff's Association and NAPO. And it focuses on 4 key areas where we need to invest, especially in our smaller departments with 200 or fewer officers, where there's tends to be fewer resources. One, it invests in training, safety, de-escalation, domestic violence response training. It helps our smaller departments pay for overtime. Where in my district, we've got 79 towns, most of whom have their own police departments. So they have smaller departments. They need help to be able to take people off out of the police cars and make sure they get the training they need. So that's one. Two, it supports body-worn cameras to hold everyone accountable, especially on the storage side of it, which tends to be very expensive every year, and a lot of our departments just can't afford that. Three, it gives resources to recruit new officers and to retain current officers. Make sure we keep the best, make our departments stronger. Right now, as you know, given all that's gone on, it's harder to recruit and retain officers. And the fourth big area is resources for mental health for our resources for our officers. And this came about by talking to departments, by talking to communities, and we pulled this together, and there's a ton of support for it. And I think the big lesson is you need to invest, not defund. You need to actually put resources forward to help our officers, our departments, and our communities to make them stronger.
A couple of things on that. First,
Sure.
How do you pitch more funding for police to Americans who maybe thought that defunding, quote unquote, was the answer?
That's a great question. I mean, I think if we've learned anything from the last couple of years is that to have stronger departments and better officers, you're not going to get there by cutting budgets to the bone. You end up then actually making weaker departments because you need to invest in training. And if you want good training, you actually have to de-escalation training or domestic violence training. You have to put resources behind that. I think officers and communities agree about body-worn cameras, but they cost money, right? And you need to actually invest to keep the best law enforcement on the job. So, and you got to support mental health. I mean, these are all things we've learned even more through these years. And, I think the new mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, who was a former police captain himself, said, he said, I don't just subscribe to the belief of some that we can only have justice and not public safety. We can have them both. And that's my view, right? You can do both. But the idea of cutting departments and cutting investment and expecting better outcomes makes no sense to me. And that's the kind of conversations I've had with my colleagues about this.
Were there things that you wanted to put in and left out in the hopes that it could gather more support than previous bills? And, does this bill stand a better chance of getting all the way to the president's desk?
Well, there are other areas we worked on that we didn't get to agreement on. And so when we put this bill together, we wanted to actually say, instead of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, what do we think what's the best set of policies that we can draw bipartisan support and get to the president's desk? And that's how we developed the focus on the areas of policy that we did. And it's not the be all end all, but it's a really, really important step. And we'll keep working. And I think, the folks who think it's 100% or nothing are wrong. If you just wait till everything's perfect before you actually move forward, you'll never get anything done. So that's been really our approach here. And I think that one of the big takeaways is that randomly cutting budgets does not lead to safer communities. You really have to invest in mental health and transparency and safety and training and make sure our officers who put their lives on the line every day. And, we sadly, tragically lost 2 officers in the last week in the line of duty in New York City. You realize we got to get their backs and we got to do right by them. And that's what this legislation is about, doing right by them and doing right by the communities they protect.
One other thing along these lines, would you envision this as being sort of in addition to other efforts to help fight, rising crime rates?
Yes, I think, listen, again, this doesn't have everything, and there's more to do. And I think we must do more. Mayor Adams in New York City, just like many of our mayors here in New Jersey, have taken steps on community policing and to fight crime and get guns off the streets. This is a very concrete, important bipartisan step. And I think we have got to act.
Acting on legislation has been more complicated in the 50-50 Senate, though President Biden now has a chance to bring his party together with a Supreme Court nominee.
Someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court.
The president reaffirming a campaign pledge as he thanked Justice Stephen Breyer for his service, the court's oldest justice at 83, confirming his upcoming retirement during a White House meeting on Thursday.
Of course, people don't agree, but we have a country that is based on human rights, democracy, and so forth. But I'll tell you what Lincoln thought, what Washington thought, and what people today still think. It's an experiment.
Breyer will serve out the current term. President Biden plans to have a nominee by the end of next month.
Well, obviously, that's a very important responsibility of any president, and Democrat or Republican. So I think it's a very important pick. I think he will be able to unite the party and move forward with who he nominates. And obviously, we're just at the beginning of this process. I'm in the House, so they don't ask our opinion on this in the Senate. But I believe that the process is just beginning, of course. But I think that's going to be an important responsibility of the Senate in the next months. But we have so much else to do, right, on the affordability side. And I've got an affordability agenda. We're fighting to cut taxes and reinstate SALT and get healthcare costs down and help with childcare costs, get people to work. There's a lot on our plate, and I think we have to do all of it.
Yeah, along the lines of affordability and the cost issues, I know that one of your fellow Democrats, Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin, recently suggested that the Biden White House isn't showing enough of a sense of urgency on inflation, of cost of living. She says that's what she hears about when she sits down with people. I know the president tries to make the case Build Back Better is part of the inflation solution. Are you concerned about that not resonating with people?
Well, I'll tell you what I hear at home. Our people are concerned with the cost of the grocery store and the gas stations, and I think we need to tackle it. I've been aggressive in the legislation I've introduced dealing with supply chain issues and shipping issues, the effects of the COVID economy, right? The fact that there's boxes piled up outside everyone's home during COVID. It's put a lot of strain on the supply chain, as you know, internationally, and we've got ports all around the world closed. So I've got legislation dealing with that. We've passed a more domestic manufacturing investment legislation, which I think will help. So there's a lot we can and have to do, but it really takes Democrats and Republicans working together. And in the Problem Solvers Caucus, we've been working on these issues and working on legislation together because this is our responsibility. And so that means it's the White House, but it means that it's Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, and we're all working together to address these issues. We're still in the COVID economy here, in the throes of the COVID economy, and it's up to us all as a country to respond.
One last question for you. What do you say to fellow Democrats who are worried about the midterms, or to Republicans who are trying to make the case that they should get back control?
Well, I would say to any Democrat or Republican who's an elected official, we all have to do our jobs and put country ahead of party and make sure that you pay attention. Whether I'm focused on fixing roads and bridges and potholes. I'm about to actually go to a bridge now that we're fighting for resources. It's more than a century old, and we're dealing with a tunnel between New York and New Jersey called the Gateway Train Tunnel to get that fixed and a new tunnel built. You got to help veterans who we love and are so grateful for, and our first responders, and get their backs, and look out for people. That's what people, when voters go to the booth, they ultimately are going to grade you on. Are you fighting for them, regardless of their party? And that's our responsibility. And so that's what I say to my colleagues. And if you just do the right thing and fight for the people you represent and get the job done, and leave the politics second to doing your job.
What do you say to the voters who are maybe wondering, have the Democrats done enough to be able to keep going?
I was just in a diner this morning. I'm from Jersey, right? We go to diners, best diners in America. And two folks came up to me and said, we talked about SALT and reinstating SALT. And they talked about how they really appreciated what I was doing on the Gateway Tunnel and fighting for bipartisan governing to get things done. And what we got done on that infrastructure bill, which was once in a century, that matters for them. Those are the potholes. That's their commute. That's seeing their kids at night and getting to work in the morning. And they want to know that their member of Congress is working with everybody, Democrat and Republican, to get things done for them. They expect us to actually work together and not point fingers. And I just focus on my district. I don't work for a national political party. I work for the people in the 5th District in Jersey, and that's what I'm focused on.
New Jersey Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer, thank you so much for your time.
Great talking to you.
This is Chris Freed with your Fox News commentary coming up.
What made America great? A lot of things. And for years, Brian Kilmeade's been detailing them in a Fox Nation series. Now, into Season 8, with 2 new episodes. The first is a feature on Ellis Island.
This was the path that was paved with gold in people's mind and their vision. And it was what our founding parents and documents envisioned, that a new generation would sojourn through this, not knowing where they were going to go.
And for most of those millions of people, 98% of them that came through here, they were accepted, sent on into America to hopefully find work.
And Brian is going to tell you a lot more, but not quite yet. First, the Fox and Friends co-host has a new TV show.
Well, I just think that there's a lot of things dividing our country. I want to see if I can find some things that don't.
Brian Kilmeade's One Nation debuts this Saturday night on Fox News Channel at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Joe Manchin looks at these Democrats yelling at him and said, I don't know if you guys met me before, but I've always been a moderate, center-left. I don't know if you know the country, but we're center-right. And the press was just befuddled. Like, why would you stop this left-wing agenda? And it just brought to my mind the thought that we have lost semblance of order, and we're all my team, your team. And I think we got to get on one team. It doesn't mean I'm not going to bring up issues that divide, but I'm going to try to make it in a fun, informative way rather than in an aggressive, abusive way.
No, that's the spot that Jesse Waters used to do that show. Now he's moved to weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Has he given you any tips? Has he left any shirts with the collars up for you to wear? What's happening?
No, Jesse doesn't talk to me now because he's primetime during the week. Same thing with Sean and Tucker. I cannot get them on the phone. They don't return a text. Laura, once in a while, if she needs change of $1, she might just ask me for something. But when you go primetime, there's no reason to talk to a morning guy, let alone a radio guy, let alone on top of that, a weekend guy.
Are you going to be lonely? I mean, you're not going to have Ainsley. Steve won't be there. You can't toss to the weather for Janice. Nothing like that.
Right. That'll be fun, actually. That's what I do very similar on the Brian Kilmeade radio show. And just to be able to say, okay, I got 8 minutes in this block and I can control what happens to a degree. But I do want to give a sense that this whole thing is not scripted. I do want to have some familiar faces on, but some unfamiliar faces too. So I really want to make sure the 8 o'clock show, as different as Tucker's is during the week. I mean, you never know where Tucker's going at 8 with his monologue. And I hope that people look at the show at 8, One Nation, and say, man, I know roughly what to expect, but man, I don't know how this show is going to go, because I want people to feel that there's an unscripted nature to it. Almost like stuff that we live every day in radio.
Yeah, and radio is such a different and unique and fun thing to do. I mean, this is the thing that a lot of other hosts on Fox TV don't get to do what you get to do, and that is talk to people directly as much as you get to.
I love that you said that, because the way you build relationships, they say you network, and in this environment, you can't really network like you used to. There's no water cooler to hang out with 6 feet apart. I'm working remote. But the one thing about radio that allowed me to build up my network of contacts and friends is the nature of the medium. So, if I have Newt Gingrich for 4 minutes on TV, I know the 3 topics we're going to talk about. I'm going to say hello, I'm going to say goodbye.
Sure.
But if I have him for 12 minutes, he's got a book, and I can actually say, what's the book about? Without blowing the break. Yeah. And be able to say, hey, by the way, this just came across. Nancy Pelosi's going to go for a 19th term. Let's change gears. The control room's not in my ear saying, wait a second, we have no banners. We have no sound. What are you doing? So it is just as that freedom that we enjoy. And then at the end of 12 minutes, you're a lot closer to that person, understand them more, and they want to come back again. Because, man, in that 12 minutes, I really had a chance to talk.
Right.
Because some of the smartest people you're ever going to meet are on the radio show, and in my case would never talk to me if I didn't have it. So when I give them their opportunity to talk around the country to millions of people, hopefully listeners, they appreciate it. It kind of builds a relationship.
And Newt Gingrich, he's a talker. You might even go and say, hey, hold on, let's have you in another segment. Right.
The only thing he lost me on is colonizing the moon if he was president. When he said that in a debate, I thought, I think he just lost.
Yeah. Well, at least it wasn't Mars. I mean, that moon's at least closer.
Well, yeah, Mars takes 3.5 years, I think.
Yeah, that's not likely.
Your term's almost over by the time you arrive.
You got to get reelected to get him back home. What Made America Great? Your Fox Nation series. You've been working on this for a while, and season 8, the first couple of episodes have dropped now on Fox Nation. The first one, Ellis Island, so you got to go there.
How great is that?
Yeah.
I mean, this is where 12 million people minimum came through, where 40% of the country traced their roots back to. And you have a chance to see the ship, what would have been a steamship back then, pull up exactly where the docks are. We get off, and I get off with a historian and an immigration attorney whose family, maybe the most famous, successful in the country, whose family goes back to Ellis Island. So I got the expert on one side, and I got the historian on the other, and we take the journey that 12 million took, and we go in the same door, we wait on the same line, where physicians would run up to you and try to find if there's anything transparently wrong with you, and families and how they come together and see what they look like, and they're getting their presentation in, and we take the journey as you walk up the big platform, and then you work your way to where you're inspected, and if you do fail and your story isn't good, or the inspector says, I'm not sure you're going to be able to help us, why don't you go to court? There's courtrooms that are still there and refurbished, places where you had to sleep if you weren't feeling well. They wouldn't throw you out right away. They said, I'm going to give you a couple of days to get better. And there's different barracks, and there's pictures of these people, and it's the American experience done the right way, as opposed to sneaking serpentine style through the border, hoping Bill Maloogian doesn't put you on camera.
Yeah, going across a river and taking your family or being smuggled or all those things. Now, when you go through that, you're going up the actual steps, right, that people did like 100+ years ago.
Yeah, the same steps they made sure to restore them and put them back. It was my first time there. So my first time, I'm actually on camera with a 40-minute documentary on it. And I just think it'll whet people's appetite to find out what really happened. One myth I'd like to burst right now.
Yeah.
For the longest time, they would say, well, if your name was too complicated at Ellis Island, they would change it, and you couldn't have a say in it. They never changed a single name at Ellis Island. That was done when you got ashore, when you went for your final immigration papers, or when you registered to have a job or as a citizen officially.
Okay.
So it wasn't done right there.
It wasn't there. It was someone else in a different processing that did that, changed last names and all these kinds of things. When you think about Ellis Island, I mean, it is a symbol. I mean, the Statue of Liberty is right there.
Yeah, I mean, just think about this moment. For some reason you're leaving, whatever reason it is, it's usually not leaving a good situation, or you're joining your family, or you're the first in your family, and you got to forge this. You want to go to the new world to forge a new identity and with new hope and opportunity, but there's no social safety net. And can you imagine coming into New York Harbor, you look up and there's the Statue of Liberty, and over to the right is the island in which you hope to impress the inspectors enough where you become an American citizen. You don't have to tell that person to stand during the national anthem. You don't have to tell that person to put their hand over their heart and sing loud or take the Pledge of Allegiance. They did when they got on the ship. So they were there to perform, and they were flat out honest. What could you do? What are your skills? Who will house you? Are you going to be a ward of the state? Because we don't have money to support a bunch of people who can't feed their family.
The other new episode of What Made America Great on Fox Nation focuses on Teddy Roosevelt.
He was a fierce fighter of corruption. Big business, he took them on. He took out a lot of people.
But we're not talking about his time as president. Before Roosevelt was in the White House, he took charge of New York City policing.
It was a major change, and he was really the first reformer, and the police badly needed it.
Former New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly joins Brian on yet another of Roosevelt's accomplishments.
I mean, he's an environmentalist. He was a governor. He was a war hero. And he started off in a way in his childhood. He was so sickly. Many people didn't think he could survive. He couldn't even go to formal schooling. His asthma was so bad. They had to keep an eye on him. They didn't really feel they can put him in an environment where he could possibly get sick. So by the time he becomes a man and able to shake most of the effects of the asthma, he overcompensates, in my humble opinion, and becomes the most aggressive, venturing person you could possibly imagine. So one of the things he wanted to do is, okay, I helped McKinley get elected. I helped Rutherford B. Hayes get elected. So let me see if I can help out with civil service. And when he started helping out with civil service, he said, yeah, put me in New York. I want to see if I could be a head of police. And before there was an official police commissioner, Teddy Roosevelt took over basically a committee. And he found out all the cops were Irish. They basically a lot of them were corrupt. There was no organization, no academy, no streamlining of guns. They had no sense of shifts and accountability. He put all that in place. And to do it, he had to really shake this institution from the core. And what he did is enlist the press to help him. And one of the first areas he hit is 5 Points in New York, and the block still exists the way it was. These immigrants were really put up by slumlords, and they live in the most horrific conditions you could possibly imagine. But new immigrants had so little rights and no political power, so they, for the most part, were abused. So what he did is brought a photographer with him, and he literally put flash photography that would light up a dark room and would show these families and what they were going through, and then he would put it on the paper, and then he would walk around and make the cops crack down on these guys. And then when it came down to actually fixing the neighborhood, he said, we're not going to fix it by building new buildings. We're going to wreck them and make a park. We're going to make this a place that families can enjoy. You know, that park is still there. And then you see what he did for the police force in particular. Ray Kelly brings me through. He said, I used his desk. We all used his desk. Bratton used his desk because what he did for the city, we truly appreciated. He gave them a sense of pride of being in law enforcement. And he let other people like Italians and Jewish people become cops. Can you imagine? And just broadened it out and made them accountable and made the modern police force. That's what he did in 2.5 years.
And this is all before he became a war hero. It's before 1898, and it's before, of course, he became vice president and president. But in 2021, 22, the modern era, his statue's gone.
And it's actually in the piece because I go to the Museum of Natural History where Ray Kelly grew up, and we walk the streets where he was. And the reason there is a Museum of Natural History is because of Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of what he did in Hunted is in the Museum of Natural History. His statue on a horse with an African-American and an Indian next to him, because he's on a horse, they said it's not a good image. We're going to get rid of it. So they sent it to the Teddy Roosevelt Museum in North Dakota, and it's just criminal. That's just part of the idiocy in America today. Ooh, he was talking in a way. He had a mom that had relatives fight for the Confederacy. So, he would say some things that you probably want back that has nothing to do with the statue. He also hooked up with Booker T. Washington and did more for race relations and fought for more blacks in America at a time in which there was such racial division in a way we never saw a leader do. He was the first man to invite a black man to dinner with his family at the White House. And it's just, he broke barrier after barrier.
All right, the show is One Nation. It's on Saturday nights on Fox, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. What Made America Great is now something you can get on Fox Nation with these specials that Brian's put together, the new episodes that are out. And, of course, you can see him on Fox and Friends, hear him on the radio on the Brian Kilmeade Show. Brian, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.
Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Chris Freed. What's on your mind?
So the conference championships are this weekend, and we got Bengals, Chiefs, we got Niners, Rams. I got to say, I do want the Bengals to win the whole thing in the Super Bowl, but I also have to admit, I go mainly by colors of the team and if I like the mascot or the helmets in particular. I think if the helmets are cool, they have a better chance. But unfortunately, the news has affected football somewhat. Like, my dad is more political, and he got really into the whole controversies and all that. So he goes, I know for the Super Bowl, we're not watching the Super Bowl anymore. We're going to watch the Puppy Bowl instead. But it sounds like a cute idea. And then the lab sits for the anthem, and ruins his day. I love those fathers, by the way, who, in football, they've been making from the stands the same joke for decades and decades. They go, hey, ref, you're missing a good game. Never been funny once. And the people still do it and love it. Someday the ref it'd be hilarious if they just cared one time and gave him a shot, and they go, ruling on the field stands as a fumble. However, it is being further challenged by the fat, drunken father of the left tackle who has thrown his challenge boot on the field. I also feel like politics could benefit from football in It's basically all those congressional hearings and things, and it's all for show. And they're basically team sport politics. Like, it'd be funny if we start the hearing and we do the starting lineups for both teams. They've got a red and blue jerseys. Cory Booker, the Yale University. Anyway, I think it'd make it more interesting. I'm Chris Freed. My new comedy album, It Takes a Privilege, comes out February 25th, but you can pre-order it on iTunes and Amazon and anywhere you wish. Go Bengals!
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Fox Nation presents podcasts Women of the Bible Speak.
I'm Shannon Bream, host of Fox News at Night and author of the new book, Women of the Bible Speak, the wisdom of 16 women and their lessons for today. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, foxnewspodcast.com, or wherever you download your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.